Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory, October 1882. Lucille Owens shivered as the autumn wind cut through her thin traveling coat. The train platform stood empty except for her trunk, the station master, and the crushing weight of disappointment pressing down upon her shoulders. The last passenger had disembarked 20 minutes earlier, and the man who had promised to meet her, her future husband, was nowhere to be found. "Miss? Platform's closing soon. You sure there ain't nobody coming for you?" The station master adjusted his pocket watch, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. "He said he would be here," Lucille replied, though her voice lacked conviction. She clutched the letter in her pocket, the paper now worn at the creases from constant reading. Mr. Samuel Thornton. Perhaps he was delayed. The station master shook his head. "Thornton? He left town near 6 weeks ago. Sold his claim after the silver vein dried up. Word is he headed to Colorado Territory." The world seemed to tilt beneath Lucille's feet. 6 weeks? The letter proposing marriage had arrived only a month ago. She had spent nearly every penny traveling from Boston to this remote Wyoming town, believing promises of security and perhaps, eventually, affection. "I see," she managed, though she didn't see it all. What she saw was foolishness, her own, staring back at her with unforgiving clarity. "I can offer you a bench inside until morning, Mississippi. Not proper, but better than outdoors. Telegraph office opens tomorrow if you need to contact someone." The station master's kindness only heightened her humiliation. As darkness settled over the dusty town, a wagon approached. The weathered vehicle creaked to a stop near the platform, and a tall man climbed down. He nodded to the station master before turning his attention to Lucille. "Evening, Frank," he said, his voice deep but quiet. "Is there trouble?" "Evening, Elijah. Miss here was expecting Samuel Thornton. Seems nobody told her he pulled stakes weeks ago." The man called Elijah studied Lucille, his eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him. Plain clothes worn with the practical ease of a working man, a beard neatly trimmed but without vanity, and hands that spoke of honest labor. "Thornton's mail-order bride, then," he stated rather than asked. Lucille lifted her chin. "I am no one's bride, sir. It appears I have made a grave error in judgment." The Boston composure she had cultivated her entire life was crumbling, but she clung to it desperately. "Elijah Callahan." He introduced himself with a slight bow of his head. "I own the Circle C ranch outside of town. I'm sorry for your situation, miss." "Owens. Lucille Owens." She extended her gloved hand automatically, years of proper upbringing momentarily overcoming her distress. His large hand enveloped hers briefly. "Miss Owens, there's a respectable boarding house in town. Mrs. Henderson runs it. I'd be happy to take you there." Relief battled with suspicion. In Boston, a strange man offering assistance would be met with polite refusal. But this wasn't Boston, and she had precisely $1.47 remaining after her journey. "That's very kind, Mr. Callahan, but I wouldn't wish to impose." "No imposition. I'm delivering supplies." Was headed that way regardless. The station master interjected. "Elijah's good people. Mississippi known him since he came to these parts 8 years back. You could do worse than accept his help." With few options before her, Lucille nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I would be grateful for the ride." He loaded her trunk onto the wagon with ease, then offered his hand to help her climb aboard. The wagon seat was hard, but after hours on the train, Lucille hardly noticed. As they pulled away from the station, the reality of her situation struck her anew. "I suppose everyone will know by morning," she said quietly. Elijah clicked his tongue to urge the horses forward. "Folks here mind their business, mostly. But they'll still know I was foolish enough to travel across the country to marry a man I'd never met. Wouldn't be the first time. Won't be the last." His matter-of-fact tone held no judgment. "Life out here is hard, especially alone. Men write letters. Women answer. Sometimes it works out. And sometimes the man leaves town before the woman arrives." Lucille finished bitterly. Elijah said nothing for several moments as they traveled down the main street. Willow Creek was small but appeared orderly, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the thoroughfare. A few saloons spilled light and piano music into the evening, but most establishments were already closed. "Thornton wasn't much for commitment," Elijah finally said. "Mining's like gambling. When luck runs dry, men like him move on." A warning that comes rather too late, I'm afraid, Lucille replied, attempting to inject humor into her voice. The wagon stopped in front of a two-story house with a small sign reading Henderson's Lodging hanging beside the door. Before Elijah could climb down, the door opened, and a plump woman with gray-streaked hair stepped onto the porch. "Elijah Callahan, is that you at this hour?" she called, then noticed Lucille. "And who might this be?" Elijah helped Lucille down from the wagon. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Lucille Owens. She's in need of a room." "Miss Owens, Mrs. Sarah Henderson." The woman's shrewd eyes took in Lucille's travel-worn appearance and the solitary trunk. Understanding dawned on her face. "Another one Thornton left high and dry, I reckon." Lucille felt her cheeks burn. "You've seen this before?" Mrs. Henderson snorted. "Third one this year. Last girl had sense enough to write ahead and confirm before selling everything. You'll stay here tonight. No charge. We'll sort out what's what in the morning." "I can pay something," Lucille protested, though her nearly empty purse said otherwise. "I said we'll sort it out." Mrs. Henderson's tone brooked no argument. She turned to Elijah. "You staying for coffee?" He shook his head. "Need to get back to the ranch." To Lucille, he added, "Mrs. Henderson will take good care of you." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," Lucille said, genuine gratitude in her voice. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." With that, he climbed back onto his wagon and disappeared into the night. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson led Lucille to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Wash up and get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning." But morning brought little clarity. Lucille awoke to the realization that she was stranded in a frontier town with no prospects, little money, and a trunk full of unsuitable clothing. After a breakfast she could barely touch, she sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, considering her limited options. "I could telegraph my cousin in Boston," she said, though the words tasted like defeat. "She might send money for my return." Mrs. Henderson poured more coffee. "And if you go back, what then? What waits for you there?" The question hit uncomfortably close to the truth. At 26, Lucille had faced the reality of spinsterhood in Boston. Her position as a shop girl had ended when the owner's son made unwanted advances. With no parents living and only distant relatives offering reluctant charity, Samuel Thornton's letters had seemed like providence. "Nothing waits for me," Lucille admitted. "But what can I do here? I have no skills useful in a place like this." "Can you read and write?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Yes, of course." "Cipher?" "I managed the accounts at my last position." Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Willow Creek's growing. The schoolteacher married last spring and moved to her husband's ranch. Town council's been looking for a replacement. Pays not much, but includes a small house behind the schoolhouse." Hope flickered briefly before Lucille tamped it down. They wouldn't hire a stranger. They might hire an educated Eastern woman with proper manners. Mrs. Henderson assessed her. "Council meets this afternoon. I know most of them. I could put in a word." Before Lucille could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson returned moments later with Elijah Callahan. "Mr. Callahan," Lucille greeted him, suddenly conscious of her rumpled traveling dress. "Miss Owens." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a slight wave. "I've come with a proposition." Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow, but discreetly withdrew to the kitchen. "A proposition?" Lucille echoed, uncertain. "I need someone to teach my daughter." He spoke directly, without preamble. "She's 10. Smart, but wild as a jackrabbit. Previous tutors haven't lasted. I'd pay fair wages, provide room and board." Lucille blinked, caught off guard. "You have a daughter?" "Emma." A slight softening around his eyes accompanied the name. "My wife died when Emma was 3. Girl needs a woman's influence." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lucille said automatically, then considered his offer. "Mr. Callahan, I appreciate your thinking of me, but we only just met. Why would you trust your daughter's education to a complete stranger?" He shifted his hat in his hands. "Saw your books when we loaded your trunk. Shakespeare, mathematics, history, not exactly dime novels. And Mrs. Henderson vouched for you this morning." Lucille glanced toward the kitchen, realizing the older woman must have visited with Elijah before he arrived. "I see. And what would this position entail exactly?" "Teaching Emma reading, writing, arithmetic, history, whatever else girls should know. Helping with household matters. Ranch house isn't fancy, but it's comfortable enough." "And how far is this ranch from town?" 8 miles west. Not close, but I come in for supplies weekly. Emma and I live there, plus a cook, Mrs. Gunderson, and 3 ranch hands who have their own quarters. Lucille weighed her options. Teaching at the Circle C would be a temporary solution at best, but it would give her time to consider her future while earning her keep. The alternative, begging for passage back to Boston or taking her chances with the town council, seemed less appealing by comparison. I would want to meet Emma first, she said finally. Elijah nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. She's with me. Outside. The girl who entered the parlor moments later was all elbows and knees, with her father's dark hair braided messily down her back and a dress that had clearly seen better days. She assessed Lucille with frank curiosity. Are you going to be my new teacher? Emma asked without preamble. I'm considering it, Lucille replied honestly. Would you like to learn from me? Emma shrugged. Depends. Mr. Peterson wanted me to memorize presidents and Bible verses. Miss Winters cried when I brought a snake inside. What would you teach me? Presidents and Bible verses have their place, Lucille said carefully, as does knowing not to frighten people with snakes. But I would also teach you about the world beyond Willow Creek, mathematics that could help you manage a household or business someday, and perhaps even a little French or Latin if you showed interest. Emma's eyes widened slightly. You know French? Oui, mademoiselle, Lucille replied with a small smile, though my accent leaves much to be desired. Pa, she knows French, Emma said, turning to her father. So I hear. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. To Lucille, he added, Position's yours if you want it, Miss Owens. You can start tomorrow. Give you time to sort yourself out today. Lucille hesitated only briefly. I accept, Mr. Callahan. Thank you for the opportunity. And so began Lucille Owens's unexpected life at the Circle C Ranch. The journey there the following day revealed a property larger than she had imagined, rolling grasslands surrounding a substantial log home with several outbuildings. The house itself was plain but well-maintained, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Gunderson reigned supreme, and a parlor containing a surprising luxury, a small bookshelf filled with volumes. Her room, while modest, offered a view of distant mountains and had been prepared with obvious care. Fresh linens covered the bed, a small vase of late wildflowers sat on the dresser, and someone had placed a handmade quilt across the foot of the bed. Emma insisted. Elijah explained when he showed her the room. Said you'd need something pretty after being disappointed by Thornton. The casual mention of her failed marriage prospect stung less than Lucille expected. Please thank her for me. It's lovely. The routine of ranch life established itself quickly. Mornings began before dawn with the smell of coffee and biscuits. By 8 o'clock, Lucille and Emma were in the small study Elijah had converted for lessons. Afternoons often found them outdoors, with Emma proudly showing Lucille the property and teaching her the names of local plants and animals. Despite her initial wildness, Emma proved to be an eager student when engaged properly. She devoured books at an astonishing rate and showed a natural aptitude for mathematics. What she lacked was discipline and the finer points of feminine accomplishments, areas where Lucille focused her attention. I don't see why I need to know how to pour tea properly, Emma complained one afternoon as they practiced with Mrs. Gunderson's second-best tea service. Nobody here cares if I slurp. Perhaps not today, Lucille conceded, but someday you might find yourself in situations where such skills matter. Education isn't just about what you need now. It's about preparing for all possible futures. Emma considered this. Did you learn this stuff because you thought you'd marry someone important? The question, innocent but pointed, made Lucille pause. I learned because my mother believed a lady should be prepared for any circumstance. Marriage was expected, yes, but education served me even when marriage prospects didn't materialize. Like with Mr. Thornton, Emma said, then immediately looked contrite. Pa said I shouldn't mention him. It's all right, Lucille assured her. Mr. Thornton's departure was a disappointment, but perhaps also a blessing in disguise. It led me here, after all. That evening, Lucille found Elijah on the front porch, smoking a pipe and watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. She hesitated in the doorway, but he noticed her presence and gestured to the empty chair beside him. Emma's improving, he said as she sat down. Mrs. Gunderson says she even folded napkins for dinner without being asked. She's a remarkable girl, Lucille replied. Bright, curious. She reminds me of myself at that age, though I never had her freedom. Freedom's got its price. She's missed having a mother's guidance. He tapped his pipe against the porch rail. I've done what I can, but there are things a man doesn't know how to teach a girl. You've done well with her, Mr. Callahan. She adores you. He smiled slightly, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Elijah, please. Seems strange to be so formal when we share meals daily. Elijah, Lucille agreed, testing the name. And I'm Lucille, of course. A comfortable silence settled between them as the last light faded from the sky. Stars appeared, more numerous than Lucille had ever seen in Boston. I never thanked you properly, she said finally. For helping me that night at the station. For offering me this position when you had no reason to trust me. Seemed the right thing to do. He looked at her directly. Thornton was a fool. The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, warmed Lucille more than she expected. Thank you. Though perhaps it's best that particular arrangement never came to fruition. November brought the first snow, and with it, preparations for winter that occupied everyone at Circle C. Lucille found herself helping to preserve the last of the garden harvest, learning to make soap from rendered fat and lye, and assisting Mrs. Gunderson with mending clothes and quilting. Emma thrived under the new routine, especially when Lucille incorporated practical skills into her lessons. They calculated feed quantities for the livestock, practiced penmanship through letters to Emma's aunt in Missouri, and read literature aloud in the evenings while they worked on needlepoint. Elijah often joined these evening readings, sitting quietly in his chair by the fire, ostensibly focused on ranch ledgers, but clearly listening to Lucille's voice as she brought Dickens or Austen to life. One such evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Elijah closed his ledger and looked at Lucille. You've changed things here. For the better. Lucille set aside her sewing. I'm glad to hear that. I've grown quite fond of Circle C. Of Emma. Just Emma. There was something in his tone, a question beneath the question. And Mrs. Gunderson, of course. Lucille replied lightly, though her heart had begun to beat faster. And I've developed a certain attachment to that cantankerous old mare you assigned for my riding lessons. He chuckled. Buttercup's taken a shine to you too. First time I've seen that horse willingly accept a saddle in years. Perhaps she simply needed patience and a firm hand. Lucille met his eyes. Most difficult creatures do. Is that what I am? A difficult creature? I didn't mean, she began, flustered. I know. He leaned forward. Lucille, Christmas is coming. Emma wants to host a proper dinner. Invite some neighbors. She says you've been teaching her holiday customs from back east. Yes, we've discussed it. She's particularly interested in Christmas pudding, though I've warned her our frontier version may not match the illustrations in Godey's Lady's book. Would you help her plan it? Make a list of what we'd need from town. Of course, though I should mention that I had planned to inquire about the school position again. The council passed me over in October, but with Mrs. Miller leaving for Denver after her husband's promotion. Elijah's expression changed subtly. You're considering moving to town. I came here to teach Emma temporarily. I've been grateful for the position, but I don't want to overstay my welcome. You haven't. His response came quickly. Emma needs you. The house runs smoother with you here. Even the hands comment on how much better everything is. That's kind. But stay through winter, at least, he interrupted. Wyoming winters are harsh. Towns often cut off when snow's deep. It was a practical argument, and Lucille nodded slowly. Very well. Through winter. If Elijah seemed unusually attentive in the weeks that followed, Lucille attributed it to the approaching holiday. He made 2 trips to town, returning with packages that disappeared into his bedroom. Mrs. Gunderson and Lucille spent days baking cookies and fruitcakes, while Emma constructed paper decorations and garlands of popcorn and cranberries. The Christmas dinner itself was a success beyond anyone's expectations. 3 neighboring families braved the cold to attend, bringing dishes to share and creating a festive atmosphere that filled the ranch house with laughter and conversation. Emma proudly served the Christmas pudding, which had turned out remarkably well despite frontier substitutions. As the evening drew to a close and guests began bundling up for the journey home, Lucille found herself standing beside Elijah near the fireplace. Emma did wonderfully, she said, watching the girl bid farewell to the guests. You should be very proud. I am. Of both of you. He hesitated, then added, I have something for you. A Christmas gift. I'd prefer to give it privately, if you wouldn't mind staying up after Emma goes to bed. Curiosity piqued, Lucille agreed. After helping with cleanup and seeing Emma tucked in, she returned to the parlor where Elijah waited with 2 glasses and a bottle of sherry. Mrs. Gunderson's contribution, he explained, pouring a small amount into each glass. Said it was traditional. It is, Lucille confirmed, accepting the glass. Merry Christmas, Elijah. Merry Christmas. He touched his glass to hers, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It's not much. Lucille carefully unwrapped it to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a book. When she opened it, she discovered it was actually a locket with space for 2 tiny photographs. Elijah, it's beautiful, she breathed, genuinely touched. Thought you might put Emma's picture in it. When you do leave us. There was resignation in his voice. And whoever else matters to you. The implication that he expected her departure even as he gave her a gift meant to commemorate her time at Circle C struck Lucille forcefully. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you, she said softly. I'll treasure it. She had a gift for him as well, a hand-knitted scarf she'd worked on during evening readings, but as she presented it, the modest offering seemed inadequate compared to his thoughtful gesture. Winter deepened, and the ranch became increasingly isolated as snow made travel difficult. January brought a particularly severe blizzard that confined everyone to the house for 3 days. Lucille and Emma used the time to create an indoor scavenger hunt, stage dramatic readings of Shakespeare, with Mrs. Gunderson reluctantly playing multiple roles, and experiment with new recipes using their dwindling store of fresh ingredients. On the 4th day, as the storm finally abated, Elijah announced he needed to check the cattle in the north pasture. They should have found shelter in the stand of cottonwoods, but I need to make sure none are stranded in drifts, he explained as he prepared to leave. I'll be back before dark. Emma watched anxiously from the window as her father rode out. He'll be careful, won't he, Miss Lucille? Of course, Lucille assured her, though she felt her own twinge of worry. Your father knows this land better than anyone. But as afternoon waned and the early winter darkness approached with no sign of Elijah, concern grew. Mrs. Gunderson prepared dinner with uncharacteristic silence, while Emma paced between the window and the door. Something's wrong, the girl finally declared. Pa's never late. Never. I'm sure he's fine, Lucille said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Perhaps he found cattle that needed attention, or stopped to help one of the hands. The hands are all in the bunkhouse. I checked. Emma grabbed her coat from the peg by the door. I'm going to look for him. Emma Callahan, you will do no such thing, Lucille said firmly, taking the coat from her hands. Night is falling, and there's still 2 feet of snow out there. But Pa would want you safe. Lucille softened her tone. However, you're right to be concerned. I'll speak with Mr. Jensen. Mr. Jensen, the foreman, shared their worry when consulted. Boss knows better than to stay out after dark in this weather. I'll gather the boys, and we'll head toward the north pasture. I'm coming too, Lucille stated, already reaching for her heaviest coat. Miss Owens, with all due respect, you're not used to these conditions. I'm a quick learner, Mr. Jensen, and 4 eyes are better than 3. She met his gaze steadily. I'll follow your instructions precisely, but I am coming. Perhaps recognizing the futility of argument, or perhaps respecting her determination, Jensen nodded curtly. Dress warm, very warm, and you ride between me and Carter at all times. Mrs. Gunderson, though clearly disapproving, helped Lucille layer clothing. Wool stockings, 2 petticoats, her heaviest dress, a flannel shirt of Elijah's over that, and finally her coat. Gloves, a knitted scarf, and a borrowed hat completed the ensemble. You look after Emma, Lucille instructed the cook. Don't let her follow us, no matter what. I'll tie her to a chair if I must, Mrs. Gunderson promised grimly. You bring him home, Miss Owens. The search party set out with lanterns, extra blankets, and a flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes. The snow had drifted in places to nearly 3 feet, making progress slow and treacherous. They called Elijah's name periodically, their voices swallowed by the vast white landscape. They found his horse first, sheltering beneath an overhang, still saddled but without its rider. Jensen's face grew grim. He wouldn't leave Thunder willingly, he said, checking the horse for injuries. Must have been thrown. Fear clutched at Lucille's heart. How far could he have gone on foot in this weather? Not far, Jensen admitted. We'll spread out, but stay within sight of each other's lanterns. It was Lucille who spotted the dark shape against the snow, partially covered by a fresh drift. There, she called, already urging her horse forward. Elijah lay unconscious, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle. His face was pale beneath his beard, lips tinged with blue, but when Lucille pressed trembling fingers to his neck, she felt a pulse. He's alive, she cried, sliding from her horse and dropping to her knees beside him. Elijah, can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Jensen and the others reached them moments later, quickly assessing the situation. Broken leg, probably ribs too from the fall. Hypothermia setting in. Jensen looked at Lucille. We need to get him warm and back to the house. How? He can't ride. We'll make a travois, drag him behind one of the horses. Jensen was already giving orders to the other men. Carter, your horse is strongest. Fisher, help me find branches. While the men worked, Lucille removed her coat and laid it over Elijah, then took his cold hands between hers, rubbing vigorously. Don't you dare die, Elijah Callahan, she whispered fiercely. Emma needs you. She stopped, surprised by the emotions welling up. I need you too. Please fight. By the time they reached the ranch house, Elijah had regained consciousness enough to groan in pain when they moved him. Emma, who had been watching for their return, ran out to meet them. Pa, she cried, seeing her father's condition. Is he going to die? No, Lucille said firmly, as much to convince herself as the girl. He's hurt and very cold, but we're going to take care of him. I need you to be brave and help Mrs. Gunderson prepare hot water bottles and bandages. The next hours were a blur of activity. They settled Elijah in his bed, where Jensen and Carter set his broken leg as best they could with splints made from barrel staves. Mrs. Gunderson prepared a poultice for his bruised ribs, while Lucille and Emma took turns spooning broth into his mouth when he was conscious enough to swallow. By morning, Elijah's color had improved, though fever had set in. Jensen rode to town to fetch the doctor despite the dangerous conditions, leaving Lucille in charge of the patient. Talk to him, Mrs. Gunderson advised when Lucille expressed concern about his restless sleep. Fever dreams are dark places. A familiar voice can be a lifeline. So Lucille sat beside Elijah's bed, alternately reading aloud from his favorite books, telling him stories of her life in Boston, and simply holding his hand while she cooled his brow with damp cloths. Emma joined her when not helping Mrs. Gunderson, the girl's fear gradually giving way to determination as she saw her father respond positively to their care. You're not going to leave us, are you? Emma asked quietly on the second night, as they sat together beside Elijah's bed. After Pa gets better, I mean. Lucille hesitated. I hadn't decided. He wants you to stay? He told me so. Did he? Lucille's heart quickened. After Christmas, I asked if you could stay forever, and he said he hoped you would, but it had to be your choice because you were a lady who needed to make her own decisions. Before Lucille could respond, Elijah stirred, his eyes opening lucidly for the first time since his accident. Emma, he croaked. Pa. The girl launched herself carefully against his side, mindful of his injuries. Easy, Wildcat, he murmured, weakly raising a hand to stroke her hair. You fell off Thunder and broke your leg, and Miss Lucille found you in the snow, and we thought you might die, but she wouldn't let you, Emma said in one breath. Elijah's gaze shifted to Lucille, who suddenly felt self-conscious in her rumpled dress, her hair escaping its pins after 2 days without proper attention. You found me, he asked. We all did. Mr. Jensen organized the search. But Miss Lucille spotted you first, Emma interjected. And she gave you her coat and held your hands all the way home. A ghost of a smile touched Elijah's lips. Seems I owe you my life, Miss Owens. Lucille, she corrected softly. And you owe me nothing. I simply did what anyone would do. Not anyone would ride out in a Wyoming winter night to search for a man they barely know. I know you, she countered. I've known you for months now. His eyes held hers. Not well enough, perhaps. Emma looked between them, then announced, I'm going to tell Mrs. Gunderson Pa's awake. She'll want to bring broth. She slipped from the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. Alone with Elijah, Lucille suddenly found herself without words. He reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly. Thank you, he said simply, for finding me, for caring for Emma. For everything. I was so afraid, she admitted, the confession easier in the dimly lit room. When we found you in that snow. I thought of you, he said, his voice still raspy. When I fell. Knew it was bad. Cold was setting in. Thought about Emma, of course, but also you. Regretted not telling you. Telling me what? She prompted when he trailed off. He took a labored breath. That I want you to stay? Not as Emma's teacher. Not as an employee. As. He hesitated. As my wife, if you'd consider such an offer. Lucille stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Elijah, you're feverish. You don't know what you're saying. Been wanting to say it since Christmas. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Maybe before. Just couldn't find the right way. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying things. But I came here to marry someone else, she protested weakly. Thornton, he acknowledged with a grimace that might have been pain or displeasure. Man you never met. I'm offering something different. You know me. Good and bad. And I know you. Respect you. More than that. He paused, gathering strength. I love you, Lucille. Understand if you don't feel the same. But nearly dying makes a man honest. Tears filled Lucille's eyes. I came to Wyoming expecting marriage to a stranger for convenience and security. Instead, I found. She struggled to articulate the transformation of the past months. I found a home, a purpose, a family of sorts. And yes, I found love too. For Emma. And for you. Hope flickered in his eyes. Is that a yes? It's a ask me again when you're fully recovered, she replied with a watery smile. I want to be certain you mean it, and that you're asking for the right reasons. Fair enough. He relaxed against the pillows. But I will ask again. The doctor arrived later that day, confirming what they'd already surmised. A broken leg, bruised ribs, and a mild case of hypothermia that could have been fatal had Lucille and the others not found him when they did. He reset the leg properly and left medicines for pain and fever, with instructions for Elijah to remain in bed for at least 2 weeks. Elijah proved to be a terrible patient, chafing against confinement and worrying about ranch operations despite Jensen's assurances that everything was under control. Only Emma and Lucille could persuade him to rest, especially when they turned his recovery into a family affair. Emma practicing her reading aloud to him, Lucille bringing ledgers and correspondence to his bedside to keep him informed while enforcing the doctor's orders. As February arrived with its bitter cold, life at Circle C settled into a new rhythm. Elijah graduated from bed to a chair by the fire, his splinted leg propped on a stool. Emma's lessons continued, now often conducted in the parlor so Elijah could listen and occasionally contribute. One evening, as Emma played checkers with Mrs. Gunderson and Lucille sat mending by the fire, Elijah motioned her closer. I have a question for you, he said quietly. Yes. Her hands stilled on her sewing. The town council approached Jensen yesterday. Still looking for a teacher. Wanted to know if you were still interested. Oh, Lucille hadn't expected this. What did he tell them? That he'd pass along the inquiry. Elijah studied her face. Are you still interested? I haven't thought about it recently, she admitted. I've been rather preoccupied with a certain stubborn patient. The corner of his mouth lifted. Stubborn am I? Terribly. She smiled back. But you're improving. Enough to remember promises made. He reached for her hand. I told you I'd ask again when I was recovered. Doctor says the bones are knitting well. Lucille's heart began to race. Elijah, Lucille Owens, I love you. Not because you saved my life, though I'm grateful for that. Not because Emma adores you, though she does. Because you're the woman I want beside me for all my days. His eyes held her steadily. Will you marry me? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. Emma, who had apparently been eavesdropping shamelessly, let out a whoop of joy and bounded across the room. I knew it. I knew you'd say yes. Mrs. Gunderson appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. What in heaven's name? Miss Lucille is going to be my mother, Emma announced triumphantly. Well, it's about time, the cook declared, but her stern expression softened into a genuine smile. Congratulations to you both. They were married in April, when the first wildflowers dotted the prairie and Elijah could walk with only a slight limp. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Reverend Michaels riding out from town to officiate. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, proudly fulfilling both duties with uncharacteristic decorum. Lucille wore a new dress of blue silk that Elijah had ordered from Denver, with the silver book locket he'd given her at Christmas pinned at her throat. Inside were tiny photographs of Emma and Elijah, the two people who had transformed her life. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch the ranch hands had constructed and decorated with early spring blooms, Lucille reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had come to Wyoming expecting one life and found another entirely, one richer, more challenging, and infinitely more fulfilling than she could have imagined. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Michaels declared. "You may kiss your bride." Elijah's kiss was gentle but thorough, prompting whistles from the hands and a giggle from Emma. When they parted, he kept Lucille's hand firmly in his. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said softly. "I've been home for some time," she replied, smiling up at him. "Now it's simply official." The celebration lasted well into the evening, with neighbors and townspeople joining for a feast that combined the best of frontier abundance with touches of Eastern refinement. Mrs. Gunderson's venison stew alongside Lucille's Boston cream pie, square dancing followed by a waltz Lucille had taught Elijah during his convalescence. As night fell and guests began to depart, Elijah and Lucille stood on the porch of what was now truly their home. Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was asleep upstairs, while Mrs. Gunderson supervised the last of the cleanup. "Happy?" Elijah asked, his arm around Lucille's waist. "Completely." She leaned against him. "When I arrived at that train station 6 months ago, I thought my life was over before it had properly begun. I never imagined that being abandoned by a mail-order groom would lead to all this. Thornton's loss. My gain." Elijah pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I should probably thank him someday. If he'd met you at the station as promised, you'd be miserable in some mining camp, and I'd still be a widower trying to raise a wild daughter on my own. And I'd never have known what I was missing," Lucille agreed. She turned in his arms to face him. "I came to Wyoming looking for security, a roof over my head, perhaps eventual contentment. You've given me so much more, Elijah. A true home, a family, love. And I'll keep giving you those things, every day, for the rest of our lives," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as the stars appeared above the Circle C Ranch, bright beacons in the vast Wyoming sky.